Dawn was breaking grey over Pine Ridge Valley. Frost covered the ground like a veil of fine crystals, transforming the landscape into a white canvas dotted with pine trees. Rachel Davis, a 24-year-old woman with restless, determined eyes, adjusted her wool scarf as she walked toward the barn where the regional livestock auction would take place. "Just this fieldwork, and then only 2 semesters left until I graduate," she murmured to herself, watching the vapor of her breath condense in the chilly morning air. Professor Carter had been inflexible. All veterinary students needed to attend the auction and prepare a detailed report on the animals' conditions. For Rachel, born and raised in the big city, it seemed like a waste of time. Her interest was in small animals, clinical practice and laboratory work, not cattle destined for slaughter. The barn was packed when she arrived. Men in hats and boots conversed animatedly, exchanging information about the best heads of cattle. The aroma of strong coffee and the characteristic smell of animals mingled in the air, creating a peculiar atmosphere that she had not yet grown accustomed to, even after 3 years living on the farm she had inherited from her grandparents. "Are you going to participate or just observing, miss?" asked an elderly gentleman, his face marked by the sun and hands calloused from working in the field. "Just observing, thank you." "College assignment," Rachel responded with a polite smile, opening her notebook. The lots started to be presented. Purebred cattle, some horses, and even special sheep for wool production. Rachel methodically took notes, recording characteristics, prices, and behaviors. That's when she noticed a strange movement at the back of the barn. A group of men surrounded something, pointing and laughing with disdain. Driven by curiosity, she approached discreetly. Among the men, she could see an animal different from the others, a black buffalo, imposing in stature despite its dull coat and visible scars on its back. The animal remained completely still like a statue, only its deep eyes moving slowly, observing each person with a disconcerting intensity. "This one isn't even good for meat anymore," commented one of the farmers. "He's too quiet. Seems like they broke the beast inside." "Must have been mistreated on some farm before getting here," added another. "Look at those scars, they're not normal." The auctioneer, impatient with the last lot of the day, announced, "Come on, folks. Male buffalo, approximately 6 years old, incomplete documentation. Minimum bid just to cover transport costs. Who'll start?" An uncomfortable silence took over the environment. Nobody raised their hand. The buffalo's eyes, however, fixed on Rachel in a way that made her shiver. There was something in that gaze. A consciousness, a silent plea, something she had never seen in any other animal. Without thinking twice, Rachel raised her hand. "We have a bid," exclaimed the auctioneer, surprised. "The young lady confirms?" "I confirm," she replied, as surprised as everyone present by her own decision. "Sold," announced the man, striking the gavel with an ironic smile. "Congratulations on your acquisition, miss. What are you going to do with him?" Rachel swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the responsibility she had just assumed. She hadn't planned to buy any animal, much less a mistreated buffalo that nobody wanted. "I'm going to take care of him," she answered, trying to sound more confident than she really was. While signing the documents and arranging for the animal's transport to her farm, Rachel decided to give her new protégé a name. "I'll call him Bandit," she told the handler who was helping her lead him to the truck. The man laughed. "Cute name for such a serious beast, don't you think?" As she watched the buffalo being accommodated for transport, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that this impulsive purchase would change her life in ways she could never imagine. On the horizon, the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting golden rays over the mountain landscape, like a silent portent of what was to come. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The first rays of sun had barely touched the mountains when Rachel went out to the improvised stable where Bandit had spent the night. A week had passed since the auction, and the buffalo's adaptation to the new environment was proving more challenging than she had imagined. "Good morning, big guy," she greeted, placing fresh hay in the feeding trough. Bandit remained motionless, standing in the same place where she had left him the night before. His eyes followed Rachel's every movement, but his body maintained a disturbing rigidity. He hadn't eaten properly, accepted water reluctantly, and seemed to be constantly on alert. Rachel's cell phone rang, breaking the morning silence. "Hello," she answered, without taking her eyes off the buffalo. "Rach, it's Anna Carolina. Are you coming to class today? Professor Carter is asking about the auction reports." "I will," she replied hesitantly. "But I did something crazy, Carol." "What did you do this time?" "I bought a buffalo." Anna Carolina's laughter echoed through the phone. "You're kidding, right? A buffalo? Where are you going to put it?" "There's space here on the farm. The problem is that he's not well. I think he was mistreated. He's behaving strangely." "Bring him to campus then. Dr. Lucy can take a look." Rachel thanked her and hung up. She observed Bandit once more before preparing for class. There was something in that animal's gaze that deeply intrigued her. At the university, Rachel met with Dr. Lucy Mendoza, a respected veterinarian and professor of animal pathology. After explaining the situation, she managed to convince her to visit the farm after classes. "I've never seen anything like it," commented the doctor, carefully examining Bandit that afternoon. "These scar patterns aren't accidental, and this behavior seems conditioned." "Conditioned how?" asked Rachel, concerned. "As if he had been trained to respond to specific commands. Look at this." Dr. Lucy clapped her hands 3 times in quick succession. Instantly, Bandit assumed a different position, feet firmly planted on the ground, head slightly lowered like a soldier at attention. "My God!" exclaimed Rachel. "How does he know to do that?" "I don't know, but I want to examine those scars on his neck more closely. It looks like there was some kind of surgical intervention here." After a thorough examination and collection of blood samples, the veterinarian expressed her concern. "Rachel, this isn't normal. I'm going to analyze these samples in the university laboratory and let you know as soon as I have results. Meanwhile, observe any unusual behavior and note everything." 3 days later, Rachel's cell phone rang in the middle of the night. It was Dr. Lucy, her voice tense. "I found something strange in Bandit's blood. There are traces of a neurochemical substance that I can't identify in any conventional veterinary database. We need to investigate further." "What does that mean?" asked Rachel, sitting up in bed, suddenly alert. "I don't know yet, but—" The call began to fail, interrupted by static. "Be careful. Don't mention to anyone." The call dropped. Rachel tried to call back several times, unsuccessfully. She looked at her bedroom window and noticed something that made her heart race. Lights from a vehicle parked a few meters from the entrance to the farm. Lights that went out as soon as she approached the window. The next morning, Rachel tried to use her cell phone to contact the professor again, but the device was showing strange failures. Apps closed on their own, messages weren't being sent, and calls were constantly dropping. "Must be the weak signal," she murmured to herself, trying to push away the growing feeling of uneasiness. During breakfast, her cell phone emitted a notification sound. It was a message from an unknown number. "Be careful what you carry." With trembling hands, Rachel left the cell phone on the table and ran to the stable. Bandit was there, motionless as always, but something was different. His ears were raised, his eyes fixed toward the main road. "What's happening, Bandit?" she whispered, stroking the rough fur of the animal. "Who are you, really?" As if answering the unasked question, the buffalo slowly turned his head toward Rachel and, for the first time since she had brought him home, made a sound. A low, rhythmic snort, almost like a code. At that moment, Rachel made a decision. She needed to discover the truth about the animal she had saved. She picked up the phone and called the only person who could help her navigate through obscure and protected digital terrains. Peter Cassidy, her hacker friend from her college days in the city. "Peter? It's me, Rachel. I need your help. It's urgent and complicated." On the other end of the line, Peter's animated voice sounded confident. "Complicated is my specialty, Rach. What do you need?" "I need to find out the origin of an animal and what they did to him, and I think people are watching me because of it." There was a brief silence before Peter responded. "I'm coming over. Don't use that phone anymore and don't tell anyone about our conversation. If anyone asks, say I'm coming to visit you to see the farm, that's all." While waiting for Peter, Rachel returned to the stable and sat down next to Bandit. The buffalo for the first time approached her voluntarily, positioning himself as if standing guard. "We're going to find out what happened to you," she promised, feeling a growing determination. "And whoever is behind this will have to answer for it." Peter arrived at nightfall driving his moss-green jeep through the winding mountain curves. Tall, skinny, with curly hair that fell over his eyes, he seemed out of place in that rural environment with his state-of-the-art laptop and sophisticated equipment. But Rachel knew that behind the carefree appearance, he was one of the most brilliant minds she had ever known. "So, where's the famous, mysterious buffalo?" he asked, after a tight hug. Rachel led him to the stable. Bandit maintained the vigilant posture he had been showing for the last few hours, eyes fixed on the entrance, as if waiting for something. Or someone. "Wow," murmured Peter, adjusting his glasses. "This guy really seems different. He is, and someone is very interested in him. Look at this." Rachel showed the anonymous message on her cell phone and reported the technical problems she had been experiencing. Peter examined the device with a serious expression. "There's spyware." "Here," he concluded after a few minutes. "Sophisticated stuff, not amateur work. I'll deactivate it and check where it's coming from, but we need to use other means of communication from now on." They settled in the rustic kitchen of the farm, where Peter set up his equipment. The aroma of strong coffee filled the environment while he worked, his fingers flying over the keyboard with methodical precision. "The first thing is to understand who was Bandit's previous owner," he explained. "Do you have the auction documents?" Rachel handed over the paperwork she had received. It was scarce, just a certificate of property transfer with minimal information. The seller's name was registered as Horizon Farm LLC. "This isn't very useful," commented Peter. "It's probably a shell company. Let's try another approach." For hours, Peter navigated through databases, hacked into servers, and followed increasingly obscure digital trails. Rachel observed, alternating between admiration for her friend's ability and apprehension about what they might discover. "I found something," Peter finally announced, when the early morning hours were already advancing. Horizon Farm is a subsidiary of a company called Prime Livestock, which in turn is linked to a larger conglomerate, Daybreak Group. And what does that mean? The interesting thing is that Daybreak Group has received, in the last 5 years, several government contracts classified as Strategic Agricultural Research. The contracts were signed by a specific division of the Army, a division that officially doesn't exist. Rachel felt a chill. "Are you saying Bandit belonged to the Army?" "Not exactly. I'm saying he was probably part of a secret military program." Peter turned the laptop to show her the screen. "Look at this. I managed to access some fragments of deleted documents. They mention something called Project Sentinel." On the screen, excerpts from reports showed references to behavioral conditioning in large mammals, field neurochemical tests, and implementation of advanced obedience protocols. The dates coincided with the period when Bandit would have reached adulthood. "My God, Peter." Rachel felt her stomach turn. "What did they do to him?" "From what I'm seeing, they used animals as guinea pigs for some kind of behavioral control experiment. Bandit was part of a specific batch, identified as B-17 series. Most of the files were deleted, but there are traces of significant fund transfers to international laboratories specializing in neuropharmacology." A noise coming from outside made them both startle. Rachel ran to the window and saw in the distance headlights of a vehicle moving slowly along the dirt road leading to the farm. "Someone's coming," she whispered. Peter quickly closed his laptop. "We need to get out of here now. Take only the essentials. We can't leave Bandit. Rachel, if we're right, whoever's coming isn't after you or me, they're after him, probably to eliminate evidence." The headlights were getting closer and closer. Rachel made a quick decision. "There's an abandoned shed at the back of the property. My grandfather used it as storage. Nobody will look there. Let's take Bandit." They ran to the stable. Surprisingly, the buffalo seemed to understand the urgency of the situation. He followed Rachel without resistance, moving silently despite his size, as if he had been trained for nighttime operations. The shed was covered in dust and cobwebs when they arrived. After accommodating Bandit in a corner, Rachel and Peter hid behind old agricultural machinery, watching through the door crack what was happening. Two men in black got out of an unmarked truck. They moved with military precision, inspecting the terrain. One of them spoke on the phone in a low voice. They entered the house, came out minutes later, visibly frustrated, and headed to the empty stable. "They know exactly what they're looking for," murmured Peter. After about half an hour of fruitless search, the men returned to the truck and left, but not before installing something near the property entrance. "Cameras," pointed out Peter. "They're monitoring the place." When silence reigned again, Rachel allowed herself to breathe. She looked at Bandit, who remained calm, watching her, as if waiting for instructions. "What do we do now?" she asked Peter. "Now," he replied, opening his laptop again, "we follow this digital trail to the end and find out who's behind Project Sentinel." While Peter resumed his work, Rachel began to examine the old shed more carefully. It was strange to be there after so many years. Her grandfather always said he kept important memories in that place, but she had never paid much attention. Her eyes fell on an old chest, covered by a dusty tarp. Moved by curiosity, she removed the tarp and opened the chest. Inside, she found old photos, yellowed documents, and, to her surprise, a diary with the inscription, "Ridge Project Confidential," on the cover. "Peter," she called with a trembling voice, "I think my grandfather knew something he shouldn't have known." Rachel's hands trembled as she opened the diary found in her grandfather's chest. The yellowed pages were filled with an elegant and firm handwriting, typical of men of his generation. The first entries dated from 15 years ago. "My grandfather never mentioned anything about military projects or secret experiments," she commented as Peter approached to observe the diary's contents. "Wait, was your grandfather in the military?" he asked, surprised. "No, at least not that I know of. He was a farmer, raised cattle." Peter picked up one of the photographs from the chest. It showed a group of men in civilian clothes, but with clearly military posture, in front of a rural facility. Among them, Rachel's grandfather smiled discreetly. "This is your grandfather, right?" Peter pointed. "And who's this beside him?" Rachel examined the photo more closely. "I don't know. I've never seen him before." Peter turned the photograph over. On the back, there was a simple note, "Pine Base, C. Anderson, E. Davis, and Team, 2010. E. Davis must be Edward Davis, your grandfather, but who would C. Anderson be? Rachel returned to the diary, flipping through it quickly until she found the mention of the name. Today, Colonel Anderson revealed the true nature of the project. I cannot condone what they are doing to those animals. The chemical conditioning is surpassing all ethical boundaries. I warned him about the risks, but he is obsessed with the idea of creating living sentinels. I believe the army isn't even aware of the extent of these experiments. Colonel Anderson, murmured Rachel. Wait, I have another entry here. The A17 substance is being tested in increasingly larger doses. The animals in Batch B are showing signs of unusual resistance, especially specimen B17. Anderson is furious with the unsatisfactory results, but to me, the resistance of these animals represents our last hope that there is still something human in this inhuman operation. Peter typed rapidly on his laptop. Colonel August Anderson, Commander of Special Operations of the U.S. Army until 2018, when he supposedly retired. After that, his name practically disappears from official records. Rachel continued reading her grandfather's notes, increasingly disturbed. According to the records, Edward Davis had been invited to the project due to his expertise in handling large animals, supposedly for a genetic improvement program for border areas. However, upon discovering the true nature of the research, he tried to abandon the project. Anderson made it clear that no one can simply leave Project Sentinel. When I expressed my intention to report the abuses, I received a nighttime visit from his assistants. The message was clear: silence or consequences. I decided then to play a more subtle game. I officially remain in the project, but I am documenting everything. One day, the truth will come to light. The records continued for a few more years, detailing Edward's growing discomfort with the experiments and his veiled attempts to sabotage some of the more extreme procedures. The last entry, dated 6 months before his passing, was particularly alarming. I managed to save the complete data from Project Sentinel. Anderson suspects me, but has no proof. I hid everything where no one would think to look. If something happens to me, the coordinates are where I always kept my greatest discoveries. That's the last record, said Rachel, closing the diary. My grandfather showed me the farm when I was a child, but never told me any of this. He died of a heart attack 6 months after this entry. Peter looked at her seriously. Rach, you don't think it was a coincidence, do you? The buffalo that nobody wanted at the auction, which by chance has the same code mentioned in your grandfather's diary, B17, and now we discover that your grandfather was involved in the same secret project. Rachel felt a shiver run down her spine. She looked at Bandit, who was observing the scene with those deep eyes that seemed to contain secrets of the world. I don't think it was a coincidence that I bought Bandit, she concluded. Somehow, it was planned. Maybe my grandfather left instructions, clues that I haven't noticed yet. Peter returned to the chest, examining each item meticulously. I hid everything where no one would think to look. The coordinates are where I always kept my greatest discoveries, he repeated. What would that be? Rachel closed her eyes, trying to remember old conversations with her grandfather. Edward Davis was a reserved man, but passionate about astronomy. He used to take his young granddaughter to observe the stars on clear mountain nights. The Dias Media telescope, she suddenly exclaimed. Grandpa always said his greatest discoveries were in the stars. They searched the shed until they found the old astronomical telescope, carefully packed in a wooden box. When dismantling it, Rachel found, hidden inside the optical tube, a small metal case. Inside it, a flash drive and a piece of paper with geographic coordinates. These are coordinates for somewhere near Oak Ridge, confirmed Peter, after consulting his GPS. About 25 miles from here. We need to go there, decided Rachel. It's not safe. Those men will return, and now we know they're not just curious people. They work for someone powerful enough to keep a secret military project running for years. That's exactly why we need to find out what my grandfather hid. It's the only way to protect Bandit and maybe other victims. A sudden noise interrupted the conversation. Bandit, who had remained motionless for hours, suddenly raised his head, ears alert, body tense. He was on alert, as if he had captured something beyond human perception. There's someone out there, whispered Peter. Rachel turned off the flashlight that illuminated the shed. In the dark, they heard careful footsteps circling the structure. A male voice spoke softly on the phone. Perimeter verified. The subject's truck is still here. They haven't left the property. Continue the search through the northern area. I'll check the abandoned structures. Cornered, Rachel and Peter exchanged looks of panic. There was no exit besides the main door, and the intruder was getting closer and closer. That's when Bandit, surprisingly, took the initiative. The buffalo moved slowly until he positioned himself between them and the entrance, assuming a posture that Rachel had never seen before. Head down, body slightly tilted like a living shield. He's protecting us, murmured Rachel, astonished. The doorknob turned slowly. Rachel's heart seemed about to jump out of her chest. When the door finally opened, revealing the silhouette of an armed man, Bandit emitted a guttural sound that echoed through the walls of the shed. The intruder hesitated for an instant, clearly surprised by the animal's presence. It was all Peter needed. With a quick movement, he threw a heavy tool toward the light switch, causing a short circuit that plunged everything into complete darkness. In the confusion that followed, Rachel and Peter managed to escape through the back of the shed, taking with them the diary, the flash drive, and Bandit, who followed them with an impressive agility for his size. They plunged into the dense forest that surrounded the property, while shouts of alarm echoed behind them. "Where do we go now?" asked Rachel, breathless, as they ventured deeper into the pine forest. Peter checked the coordinates on his cell. "Phone to Oak Ridge. We need to find out what your grandfather hid there. It's our only chance to understand what's happening and perhaps find a way to protect Bandit." The night was just beginning, and the journey would be long. But for the first time since she bought the mysterious buffalo, Rachel felt she was no longer alone in that fight. She had Peter. She had the clues left by her grandfather, and most surprisingly, she had Bandit, an ally whose true nature she was only beginning to understand. The rain began to fall when they reached the secondary road, a dirt path that wound between hills and deep valleys. The sky, previously starry, was now covered by dense clouds that occasionally lit up with distant lightning. Peter drove the jeep cautiously, avoiding the main roads where they could be easily identified. How are we going to transport a buffalo to Oakridge without attracting attention? Asked Rachel, casting a worried look at Bandit, who was following the vehicle like a faithful shadow, maintaining a constant rhythm despite the difficult terrain. "We need a truck," replied Peter, consulting his GPS. "I know someone who can help us. A former college colleague who works with cattle transport. Lives on a farm about 12 miles from here." "Can we trust him?" "I'm almost certain we can. Jack has never gotten involved. With uniform folks, if you know what I mean." Jack Mitchell's farm was modest compared to the large properties in the region. A simple wooden house, some sheds, and a small corral made up the scene, illuminated only by the weak light coming from the windows. When they arrived, the rain had turned into a violent storm. "Good God, Peter, what brings you here on a night like this?" exclaimed Jack upon opening the door, a stocky man with a thick beard and shrewd eyes. "I need your help, Jack. It's urgent and complicated." Jack looked at Rachel, soaked by the rain, and then at the imposing figure of Bandit, who remained a few meters from the house, impassive under the downpour. "Come in, all of you," he said after a moment's hesitation. "Even the big guy. I have an empty stable in the back." Once accommodated inside the house, with dry, borrowed clothes and a steaming cup of coffee in their hands, Rachel and Peter explained the situation. Jack listened attentively, his face moving from incredulity to concern as the details were revealed. "So you're telling me that this buffalo," he pointed out the window toward the stable where Bandit was resting, "is part of some secret military project and that powerful people are after him, and you need my truck to transport him to Oakridge, where the young lady's grandfather hid evidence of this scheme." "In summary, yes," confirmed Peter. "I know it sounds crazy, but it's the truth." Jack scratched his beard, thoughtful. "It's not the craziest thing I've ever heard. My father used to tell stories about government experiments with animals during the Cold War. Nobody believed him." He stood up, looked out the window to make sure there was no suspicious movement, and then faced the two with determination. "I have a small truck that I use to transport calves. It should work, but we'll need a convincing story in case we're stopped." "We can say we're taking Bandit to an agricultural exhibition," suggested Rachel. "I have his documents that prove I'm the owner." "That might work," agreed Jack. "But not during the night in a storm. Let's wait for dawn. You rest here and we'll leave at the first sign of light." The night passed slowly. Rachel couldn't sleep, restless with the events of the last few hours. She got up and went to the stable to see how Bandit was doing. The buffalo wasn't sleeping. He remained standing, as always, vigilant even in the dark. When Rachel entered, he turned his head slightly in her direction, acknowledging her presence. "What did they do to you, Bandit?" she whispered, approaching to stroke the animal's neck. Her fingers found the scar that Dr. Lucy had mentioned. Under the dim light of the flashlight, she examined it more carefully. It wasn't an ordinary scar. It had a precise, almost surgical shape, and there seemed to be something under the skin, a small protuberance that wouldn't be noticed without a more careful touch. "There's something here," she murmured to herself. "It looks like an implant?" Noise coming from outside made her freeze, footsteps in the mud, low voices. She immediately turned off the flashlight and approached the stable window. Two men were conversing near the fence, occasionally illuminated by lightning. "His last GPS location was in this area," said one of them. "The signal stopped transmitting 2 hours ago. We're wasting time. We should focus on the Oakridge coordinates. If they have Davis's diaries, that's where they're headed. Orders are orders. The colonel wants the buffalo and the intruders. He was very clear about the priorities." Rachel felt her heart race. They were being tracked. But how? Her cell phone had been turned off since they left the farm following Peter's instructions. Unless... She turned to Bandit, the sudden understanding making her gasp. The implant. It was a tracker. The animal carried in his own body the device that allowed his pursuers to find them. She ran back to the house, waking Peter and Jack with urgency. In a few minutes, the three of them had elaborated a plan. Jack knew the region like the back of his hand, and knew shortcuts that didn't appear on conventional maps. With luck, they would be able to throw off their pursuers and gain a few precious hours. "We have to remove the device," insisted Rachel, as they prepared for a hasty departure. "We don't have the time or tools for that," argued Peter. "And it could hurt Bandit. Then let's leave a false trail," decided Jack, thoughtful. "I know an old abandoned cattle truck near the river. We can plant something there that looks like the tracker signal while we go another way." Peter nodded, already working on an improvised solution with his electronic equipment. Using a small battery and components taken from Jack's radio, he created a sort of signal duplicator, which, when connected to Rachel's cell phone, would reproduce the electronic signature of the tracker. "This should keep them busy for a few hours at most," he explained. "After that, they'll realize the trick." When the first rays of sunlight began to tinge the horizon, the small convoy left the farm on an almost invisible trail that cut through a dense bamboo thicket. Jack drove the truck with Bandit in the back, carefully covered by a tarp. Peter followed behind in the jeep with Rachel at his side, monitoring the GPS and any sign of pursuit. The plan was simple. Jack would leave the signal duplicator in the abandoned truck and then meet them at a predetermined point. From there, they would proceed together to Oakridge via secondary routes, avoiding the main roads where they could be easily intercepted. "Do you think we'll make it?" asked Rachel, observing the mountainous landscape that was beginning to reveal itself with the morning light. "We have to," replied Peter with a determination that left no room for doubt. "It's no longer just about Bandit or your grandfather's project. If what we've discovered is true, there's much more at stake." When Jack returned an hour later, his face expressed a mixture of relief and apprehension. "It worked. I saw 2 black SUVs heading toward the river, exactly where I left the signal." "Great. That gives us a few hours' advantage," calculated Peter. "Let's go to Oakridge now, before they realize the deception." The road they chose was little more than a winding trail that cut across isolated rural properties and stretches of preserved forest. The truck advanced slowly, shaking on the more rugged sections, while Bandit maintained a surprising balance, as if he were accustomed to transport in adverse conditions. "He was trained for this," commented Rachel, observing the animal's behavior. "Probably for missions in difficult terrain." As they advanced toward the coordinates indicated by Edward Davis, the landscape became increasingly remote and wild. The cell phone signal oscillated until it disappeared completely. They were on their own now, guided only by Peter's offline GPS, and the determination to discover the truth that Rachel's grandfather had hidden years before. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The coordinates left by Edward Davis led the group to a remote region in the outskirts of Oakridge, where the verdant mountains gave way to peculiar rock formations. An abandoned property emerged among the dense vegetation, an old apple production farm, whose orchards were now overgrown with weeds and whose constructions were slowly crumbling, yielding to nature's relentless force. "This place looks like it's been deserted for years," commented Jack, parking the truck in a flat area near the main house. Rachel observed the construction with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The 2-story house had a melancholic air, with its broken windows and peeling paint. But there was something familiar about it, as if it were part of distant memories. "I know this place," she murmured as she got out of the vehicle. "Grandpa brought me here when I was a child. He said it was a special place where people thought differently." Peter consulted the GPS once more, confirming the location. "The coordinates point exactly to this property. But where would your grandfather have hidden such important documents? This place is huge and looks like it's about to collapse." They released Bandit from the back of the truck. The buffalo descended with cautious movements, his attentive eyes scanning the unfamiliar environment. He seemed to recognize something in the place, as his behavior subtly changed. His ears moved in specific directions, and his tense body suggested constant alertness. "He's been here before," concluded Rachel, observing the animal. "Look how agitated he is." Jack, who had been examining the structure of the main house, called them urgently. "Come see this. There. Our recent footprints here. We're not the first to visit this place in the last few days." The group gathered on the porch of the house, where boot marks stood out in the accumulated dust. They were footprints of more than one person, forming a path that went from the entrance to the back of the construction. "We need to be careful," warned Peter. "They could be the same men who were following us." They entered the house cautiously. The interior was a portrait of abandonment, furniture covered by dusty sheets, pictures on the walls with crooked frames, a staircase leading to the second floor with several steps missing. They followed the trail of footprints to a door that led to the back. There, the trail abruptly disappeared. "Strange," commented Jack. "It's as if they simply evaporated." Rachel looked around, trying to recall childhood visits. There was something important about this house, something her grandfather had shown her. "The cellar," she suddenly exclaimed. "Grandpa showed me a secret cellar during one of our visits. He said it was the hidden treasure of the farm." It took a few minutes to find the entrance. A small side room that appeared to be an old office contained a bookshelf built into the wall. When Peter moved some moldy books, he discovered a disguised opening mechanism. "Ingenious," he murmured, as the bookshelf silently slid to the side, revealing a narrow passage with stairs that descended into darkness. Using the flashlights from their cell phones, they carefully descended the damp steps. The air became colder as they advanced. At the end of the staircase, they found not a traditional cellar but a spacious area that more resembled an improvised laboratory. Metal tables, equipment covered by tarps, metal files lined up against one of the walls, and more disturbing, evident signs that someone had recently been there. Open drawers, papers scattered on the floor, marks of equipment hastily removed. "We're late," concluded Peter, examining the abandoned documents. "Someone's already been here and taken a large part of the material." Rachel felt discouragement taking over her. They had risked everything to get there, only to discover that others had anticipated them. Her gaze scanned the environment, stopping at a side wall where several maps and photographs were pinned, among them a photo of her grandfather next to the man they now knew to be Colonel Anderson. "Wait," called Jack, who was examining the concrete floor in one of the corners of the room. "There's something strange here. This piece of the floor seems to have been recently moved." Together they managed to move the concrete slab, revealing a small hidden compartment. Inside it, a hermetically sealed metal box with the symbol of the U.S. Army engraved on the lid. "Your grandfather thought of everything," commented Peter, impressed. "He hid the most important documents in a secondary compartment, anticipating that the main one would be discovered." The box contained an external hard drive, a series of official documents with military letterhead, and various labeled vials containing an amber substance. Each vial bore an alphanumeric code and specific dates. "This must be the A-17 compound your grandfather mentioned in the diary," deduced Peter, carefully examining one of the vials, the substance used in the experiments. Rachel picked up one of the documents. It was a detailed report on Project Sentinel, describing its phases, objectives, and preliminary results. The information was terrifying. The project had begun as legitimate research to improve the resistance of animals used in military operations under extreme conditions, but had evolved into something much more sinister. Following protocols secretly. Developed in foreign laboratories, Colonel Anderson's team had created a compound that temporarily altered brain chemistry, allowing induced behavioral control. The first tests on animals showed promising results, particularly in large mammals like buffaloes, due to their combination of strength, endurance, and intelligence. "My God," exclaimed Rachel as she advanced in her reading. They managed to create conditioning protocols that allowed them to control the animals remotely, using specific combinations of sounds and visual stimuli. Bandit was part of Series B, animals trained for reconnaissance and surveillance missions in border areas. That explains why he responds to certain sound patterns, observed Peter. It's like programming embedded in his brain. Jack, who had been exploring another part of the laboratory, called them urgently. "You need to see this." On a side wall, partially covered by a tarp, there was a detailed map of the United States, with red markings distributed across various border regions and strategic areas. Next to each marking, a code similar to those found on the vials. "These are distribution points," interpreted Peter. And by the quantity, this wasn't just experimental research. They were already implementing the project on a large scale. Rachel continued examining the documents until she found something that made her blood run cold. Phase 3, application in human subjects. Status, implementation initiated. Location, Operation Vigilant, special training camps. "It wasn't just animals," she whispered, horrified. "They started testing on people." The heavy silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of Bandit, who had remained outside, emitting a rhythmic snort that echoed through the entrance of the bunker. "He's trying to alert us," realized Rachel, recognizing the sound pattern that the buffalo had emitted before when he sensed danger. Peter ran to the staircase, climbing a few steps to better observe the exterior through the small opening. "We have company," he announced, quickly returning. "2 vehicles just arrived. Armed men are surrounding the house." "How did they find us so quickly?" questioned Jack, nervous. "Bandits? Tracker," concluded Rachel. "Our distraction didn't last as long as we hoped." They were cornered. The only known exit led directly to the house, now occupied by the pursuers. Jack looked around, desperate. There must be another exit. Places like this always have alternative escape routes. They frantically searched for any sign of a secret passage, removing tarps, pushing furniture, examining every inch of the walls. That's when they heard footsteps on the staircase. The men had found the entrance to the bunker and were coming down. Peter acted quickly, pushing a heavy metal table against the entrance, temporarily blocking it. Rachel gathered the most important documents and the hard drive, storing them in her backpack. "There!" Jack pointed to a ventilation grate in the ceiling, partially hidden by the lighting structure. "It could be a way out." With the help of the others, Peter managed to remove the grate. The duct was narrow but seemed to extend beyond the limits of the laboratory. With no alternative, Rachel was the first to enter, followed by Peter. Jack, being the most corpulent, had difficulty, but with an extra effort, he also managed to hoist himself into the duct. The sounds of impact on the blocked door were becoming more intense. It was a matter of minutes until the pursuers managed to get in. Crawling through the dusty duct, the trio advanced slowly in the darkness, guided only by the weak light of their cell phones and the hope of finding an exit before it was too late. "What about Bandit?" asked Rachel, anguished. "We can't abandon him." "If we can get out, we'll try to find him," promised Peter. "But first we need to survive to help him." After what seemed like an eternity crawling in the confined space, they felt a current of fresh air. The duct ended in a lateral opening of the mountain, partially covered by vegetation. They were at least 300 feet from the main house, at an elevated point that offered a privileged view of the property. From their improvised hiding place, they observed the movement below. Men in black methodically scoured the area, while a different figure supervised the operation from outside the house. An older man with impeccable military posture, grey hair, and a severe countenance that emanated authority. "That must be him," whispered Rachel, "Colonel Anderson in person." What terrified her most, however, was seeing what was happening with Bandit. The buffalo, which before was showing signs of alertness, now remained completely motionless, as if in a trance. One of the men approached him with a small device that emitted sounds at a specific frequency. The animal followed silent commands, moving mechanically toward one of the vehicles. "They're reactivating his conditioning," concluded Peter. "We need to do something before they take him." "We need to distract them somehow," whispered Jack, observing the movement of the men around Bandit. The three remained hidden among the dense vegetation that grew on the mountain slope, at a safe distance but with a clear view of what was happening at the abandoned property. Colonel Anderson, with his authoritative posture, gave precise orders while his subordinates prepared to transport the buffalo. "There are too many of them, and they're armed," pondered Peter. "Any direct confrontation would be suicide." Rachel observed the scene with a heavy heart. Bandit, who had shown so many signs of consciousness and even protection toward her, now seemed like a machine without a will of its own. Automatically, responding to the stimuli from the sonic device, it was as if his personality had been completely suppressed. "That device," she pointed, "it's what controls his behavior. If we could interfere with the signal..." Peter analyzed the situation, his brain working quickly. "I could try to create interference with my laptop, but we would need to be closer, and even then, it would be temporary." A subtle noise behind them made the three freeze. Careful footsteps were approaching on the trail that climbed the slope. They were about to be discovered. Jack silently signaled for them to separate, hiding among the bushes and rock formations. Rachel slid behind a large rock, barely breathing. The footsteps continued approaching, deliberate and precise. She closed her eyes, preparing for the worst, when a hoarse, low voice broke the silence. "If you're trying to hide from Colonel Anderson, you'll need to do better than that." A man of approximately 60 years emerged from the vegetation. He wore simple hiking clothes, but his bearing and the scar that cut across his face from temple to chin suggested a military past. His tired but alert eyes analyzed the three with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Who are you?" asked Rachel, now standing, firmly holding the backpack with the documents. "Murphy, Sergeant Murphy, retired," he responded, extending his hand in a surprisingly cordial gesture. "And you must be the meddlers who are giving the colonel so much trouble." "Do you work for him?" asked Peter, positioning himself protectively next to Rachel. Murphy let out a bitter laugh. "I did, a long time ago, until I realized what kind of monster he really was." He paused, observing the operation below. "I see you found B-17. I thought all from that series had already been discarded." Something in the way the man spoke, with a mixture of knowledge and disgust, made Rachel lower her guard. "You know about Project Sentinel," she concluded. "You knew my grandfather, Edward Davis." Murphy's hardened face softened momentarily. "Edward was a good man, one of the few who had the courage to question Anderson." He looked directly at Rachel. "You have his eyes, the same determination." "My grandfather left documents hidden in the bunker," she explained. "We managed to recover some of them, but Anderson is taking Bandit. We need to stop him." Murphy analyzed the situation below them, his experienced gaze evaluating every detail. "We can't confront them directly, not now, but I know these mountains better than any of them. There's an old mining trail we can use to intercept them in the valley, about 3 miles from here." "Why are you helping us?" questioned Jack, still suspicious. The ex-military was silent for a few moments, as if carefully choosing his words. "Because I was there from the beginning of Project Sentinel. I saw what we did to those animals. And worse, I saw what we started to do to people." His face hardened. "I have scores to settle with Anderson, and you seem to be my best chance to finally expose the truth." With no other alternative, the group decided to trust Murphy. They followed him along narrow trails that snaked up the slope, staying hidden by the dense vegetation. The ex-sergeant moved with the surprising agility of someone who knew every rock and every tree along the way. Anderson expanded Project Sentinel far beyond what the Army officially authorized, Murphy explained as they walked. What began as research to improve animals for use in special operations transformed into something much darker when he discovered the potential of the A-17 substance. "What exactly is this substance?" asked Peter. "A modified neurotoxin that, in controlled doses, allows temporary manipulation of the central nervous system. Initially, it was used only to calm animals during transport in conflict zones, but Anderson realized that, with the right conditioning protocol, he could create permanent programmed responses." Rachel felt a chill as she remembered Bandit's mechanical behavior under the influence of the sonic device. "And then he started testing on people," she completed. Murphy nodded gravely. "Not officially, of course. The officially documented project ends at Phase 2, application in animals. But Anderson created a secret branch. It started with volunteers, soldiers who didn't know exactly what they were getting into. Then, well, let's say he found volunteers in places where no one would ask questions about their disappearance. The revelation fell like a stone on the group. The silence that followed was loaded with horror at the magnitude of what they were discovering. "That's the real reason I left," continued Murphy. "One thing is to experiment with animals, as questionable as that may be. Something completely different is to use human beings as guinea pigs without their consent." After almost an hour of walking along increasingly narrow and steep trails, the group reached a natural viewpoint that offered a broad view of the valley below. Murphy pointed to a dirt road that wound between the mountains. "They'll have to pass through there. It's the only viable path for vehicles leaving this area. If we want to intercept them, it will have to be at that narrow stretch, where the road passes between those two rock formations." Peter examined the location carefully. "We could create a barricade, but they're armed. It would be too risky." "We don't need a direct confrontation," replied Murphy, a strategic gleam in his eyes. "We just need the buffalo." He took from his backpack a small device that resembled a modified radio. "This is a prototype of the control device that Anderson uses, but with a crucial difference. It was developed by Edward and me when we started questioning the Colonel's methods. It emits a signal that temporarily nullifies the effects of the conditioning." "An inhibitor?" asked Peter, fascinated. "Something like that," confirmed Murphy. "It's not perfect and works only for a short period, but it can give B-17, I mean Bandit, a window of self-awareness, enough for him to decide for himself." They quickly elaborated a plan. Jack would use his truck to partially block the road, simulating a mechanical problem. When Anderson's convoy stopped, Murphy, hidden in the nearby vegetation, would activate the inhibitor device directed at Bandit. Peter, in turn, would use his knowledge to interfere with the group's communications, creating temporary confusion. Rachel would stay with the documents in a safe position, ready to approach Bandit at the right moment. "It's risky," admitted Murphy, "but it's our only chance." "And if it doesn't work?" questioned Rachel. "What if Bandit doesn't respond to the inhibitor?" The ex-sergeant looked at her seriously. B-17 was always different from the others. That's why Anderson could never complete his conditioning. Something in this animal's brain chemistry resists total control. That's why they tried to discard him at the auction. He's our best hope. With positions taken, they didn't have to wait long. The roar of engines announced the approach of the convoy. 2 identical black SUVs, followed by a larger vehicle adapted for animal transport. Jack was already positioned, his truck strategically broken down in the middle of the narrow road. The convoy slowed down until coming to a complete stop. Men got out of the vehicles, clearly irritated by the unexpected obstacle. Jack convincingly played the role of a farmer in distress, gesturing animatedly while explaining the supposed mechanical problem. Colonel Anderson, in the second vehicle, observed the scene with impatience. His authoritative voice echoed through the valley when he ordered his men to simply push the truck off the road. It was the moment they had been waiting for. Murphy activated the inhibitor device, pointing it in the direction of the transport where Bandit was confined. Simultaneously, Peter executed his interference program, temporarily blocking the group's radio communications. The confusion was immediate. Anderson's men, suddenly unable to communicate, divided themselves between dealing with the truck and maintaining the security of the perimeter. It was at this moment that an unexpected sound caught everyone's attention, a powerful snort, followed by the impact of something heavy against the metal walls of the transport vehicle. Bandit was waking up. The metallic sound of repeated impacts echoed through the valley as Bandit, now free from the induced mental control, charged against the walls of the vehicle transporting him. Colonel Anderson, immediately realizing something was wrong, began shouting orders to his subordinates. "Activate the containment device, now!" His authoritative voice cut through the air. One of the men ran to the vehicle carrying the control device, but it was too late. With a deafening crash, the rear doors of the transport yielded under the force of Bandit's blows. The buffalo emerged, imposing and furious, his eyes now full of a lucidity that had been absent under the effect of the conditioning. Chaos ensued. Anderson's men, trained for combat situations, but not for dealing with an almost one-ton animal, in liberating fury, hesitated momentarily. It was all that Rachel needed. "Bandit!" she called, running from her hiding place toward the animal. The buffalo turned at the sound of her voice, recognizing her instantly. In a movement that surprised everyone, including Murphy, the animal approached her like a guardian, positioning itself between Rachel and the armed men. "Impossible!" exclaimed Anderson, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and disbelief. "No conditioning allows this type of selective recognition." Murphy emerged from the vegetation, the inhibitor device still in his hands, a satisfied smile on his scarred face. "Seems like you don't know your own experiments as well as you think." "Colonel?" The recognition was immediate in Anderson's eyes. "Murphy, I should have known you'd be behind this," he said, his voice loaded with contempt. "You were always too weak to understand the importance of what we were doing." "You call respecting ethical boundaries weakness," retorted Murphy, slowly advancing. "You lost your way, Anderson. You transformed legitimate research into a control project that violates all the principles we swore to defend." While the two military veterans confronted each other, Peter took advantage of the distraction to approach Rachel and Bandit. Jack had already abandoned his truck and was also joining the group. "We have to get out of here now," whispered Peter. "The interference won't last much longer." Indeed, the agents' radios were beginning to emit sounds again, indicating that communications were being re-established. Anderson noticed the movement and, with an abrupt gesture, ordered his men to surround the group. "You really think you can escape?" he questioned, his voice cold and calculating. "I have authorization to recover military property at any cost. That includes eliminating civilians who interfere in classified operations." Murphy positioned himself next to Rachel and the others. "These people don't know anything, Anderson. Your problem is with me. Let them go." "Too late for negotiations." "Old friend," replied the colonel, drawing his own weapon. "You know too much, and that animal," he pointed at Bandit, "contains years of research investment." The tension was palpable. Anderson's agents were slowly closing in, weapons in hand. There seemed to be no way out. That's when a distant sound began to grow, the unmistakable noise of powerful engines approaching rapidly. Everyone turned their attention to the curve in the road, from where 3 444 vehicles with official FBI identification emerged. They braked abruptly, forming a protective barrier between Rachel's group and Anderson's men. Armed agents quickly descended, strategically positioning themselves. Leading them, a middle-aged woman with confident posture advanced, displaying her badge. "Colonel August Anderson." Her voice was firm and professional. "Deputy Director Marina Foster, FBI. You and your men are detained for investigation related to case code B13991, informally known as Project Sentinel." Anderson's face visibly paled. "This is absurd. I'm on an official military operation. You have no jurisdiction over me or my men." The deputy director smiled coldly. "We do, when there's evidence of crimes against national security and human rights violations. Especially when this evidence is sent directly to the Department of Justice and the Attorney General." Rachel looked at Murphy, confused. The ex-sergeant seemed as surprised as she was. "You called the FBI?" she asked in a low voice. "It wasn't me," he replied, equally perplexed. The deputy director approached them. "We received an anonymous dossier 3 days ago. Documents, recordings, and even samples of the A-17 compound, with preliminary analyses that prove its use in unauthorized experiments." She looked directly at Rachel. "Along with all this, there was a note indicating that more evidence would be found with Edward Davis's granddaughter, Dr. Lucy." Rachel suddenly understood. She must have forwarded the analyses of Bandit's blood and realized the gravity of the situation. Anderson's men, outnumbered and faced with federal authority, gradually lowered their weapons. The colonel himself, however, remained inflexible, his gaze alternating between fury and calculation. "This doesn't end here," he said, addressing Murphy. "You have no idea of the forces involved in this project. People much more powerful than me are invested in the success of Sentinel. Any statements you wish to make should be made formally in testimony," interrupted the deputy director, as one of her agents approached to handcuff Anderson. What happened next was so fast that few managed to record the exact sequence. In a fluid movement, Anderson drew a second concealed weapon smaller than the first. Before anyone could react, he pointed not at the agents, but at Bandit. "If I can't recover him, no one else will have him," he exclaimed. The sound of the shot echoed through the valley. Rachel screamed, horrified, but by some innate reflex, or perhaps by the years of military training incorporated into his being, Murphy had thrown himself in front of the buffalo. The bullet hit the ex-sergeant in the shoulder, making him stagger backward. The FBI agents reacted instantly, subduing Anderson and completely disarming him this time. Murphy was supported by Jack and Peter, while paramedics who accompanied the operation ran to attend to him. "Are you okay?" asked Rachel, concerned. Murphy nodded with a grimace of pain. "It's nothing serious. I've been through worse." He looked at Bandit, who remained surprisingly calm amid the chaos. "Looks like I finally managed to do something right for one of our experiments." The FBI operation proceeded with methodical efficiency. Anderson and his men were detained and transported, while forensic experts collected evidence at the scene and in the vehicles. Deputy Director Marina approached the group again, after supervising the initial procedures. "We'll need statements from all of you," she informed, "and the documents you recovered from the bunker." She looked at Bandit with a puzzled expression. "As for the buffalo, well, that's something unprecedented for us. Technically, he's material evidence of a crime." "He's a victim, not evidence," Rachel corrected firmly. "And he has a name, Bandit." The deputy director studied the animal for a few moments, observing how he remained close to Rachel, exhibiting a protective behavior that clearly went beyond common animal instinct. "I understand your point," she finally conceded, "but we need to ensure that he is properly examined. There are scientific and legal aspects to consider." "I can help with that," Murphy intervened, now with his shoulder bandaged by the paramedics. "I know the complete conditioning protocol. I can provide information that will help reverse any residual effects." The deputy director nodded, thoughtful. "For now, he will remain under the provisional custody of Ms. Davis, with the condition that he remains available for examinations. When necessary," she decided. "We need to fully understand what was done to him and if there are other animals or people in similar situations." As the procedures continued around her, Rachel approached Bandit, gently stroking his neck. Buffalo slightly tilted his head, his deep eyes meeting hers with a connection that transcended words. "Let's go home," she whispered. "The real battle has just begun." The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains of Oak Ridge, casting long shadows across the valley. The day had been more intense and revealing than any of them could have imagined when they woke up that morning. But amid exhaustion and temporary relief, a certainty hung in the air. Anderson's final words had not been just an empty threat. If powerful people were really involved in Project Sentinel, their safety, especially Bandit's, remained at risk. As she watched Deputy Director Marina coordinating the operation with impeccable professionalism, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were just scratching the surface of something much larger and more dangerous. The bunker, the documents, Bandit himself, they were pieces of a puzzle whose complete image was still far from being revealed. "What are you thinking about?" asked Peter, joining her. "About everything we still don't know," she replied honestly, "and how much we still have to discover." 3 weeks had passed since the events in Oak Ridge. Rachel's farm, once a tranquil refuge in the mountains, had been transformed into an informal investigation center. The living room of the small house was filled with documents, printed digital files, and maps marked with detailed notes. In the center of one of the walls, an improvised board connected names, dates, and locations with colored lines forming a complex web that represented the true extent of Project Sentinel. Peter had temporarily installed himself in the guest room, transforming it into a technological center with multiple monitors and digital analysis equipment. Jack returned frequently, bringing supplies and news from town. And Murphy, still with His arm in a discreet sling had become a constant presence, contributing his insider knowledge about the project and helping to decipher codes and specific terminology in the military documents. Bandit, in turn, seemed more conscious and present with each passing day. The examinations carried out by specialists designated by the FBI confirmed what Murphy already suspected. The buffalo exhibited an unusual resistance to chemical conditioning, a rare case of neural adaptation that allowed him to gradually regain control of his own behavior. "The results are fascinating," commented Dr. Lucy, who now officially integrated the scientific investigation team of the case. His organism developed a kind of natural defense against the A17 compound, something we haven't seen in any other animal tested so far. Rachel observed the veterinarian analyzing the latest blood samples collected from Bandit. After the initial shock of the first discoveries, Dr. Lucy had become a fundamental ally, providing her scientific expertise and access to university laboratories for more complex analyses. "That explains why Anderson was so desperate to recover him," concluded Rachel. "Bandit isn't just evidence of the project, but an anomaly that could compromise the entire effectiveness of the conditioning." "Exactly," agreed Dr. Lucy. "If other animals, or God help us, people subjected to the same treatment could develop similar resistance." The phrase hung in the air, loaded with disturbing implications. The possibility that human beings were being subjected to behavioral control experiments was the darkest aspect of the entire investigation, and what most concerned the authorities involved in the case. Deputy Director Marina Foster, who coordinated the FBI operation, arrived at the farm in the early afternoon, accompanied by 2 agents. Her serious expression indicated important news. "We have significant updates," she announced after the initial greetings. "Anderson's testimony has finally started to bear fruit. Under pressure, he provided information about secondary facilities where other experiments were conducted." Everyone gathered in the living room, attentive to the new information. Marina unrolled a map over the central table. "Here, here, and here," she pointed to 3 locations in different regions of the country. Isolated rural facilities, all registered under different shell companies, but with the same pattern of energy consumption and financial movement. Peter approached, examining the marked points. "It coincides with some of the records we found in the digital files," he confirmed. "Locations of field implementation, according to the coding we identified. We've already conducted simultaneous operations at 2 of these locations," continued Marina. "We found equipment similar to that in the Oak Ridge bunker, but apparently hastily abandoned. Most concerning were the partially destroyed medical records. There's clear evidence that tests were conducted on people." A heavy silence took over the environment. The confirmation of human experiments, even though already suspected, hit everyone with renewed force. "Were you able to identify any victims?" asked Murphy, his voice betraying the guilt he still carried for having been part, even if initially, of Anderson's team. "Some names, yes," replied Marina. "Mainly low-ranking ex-military homeless people and," she hesitated briefly, "psychiatric patients irregularly transferred from public institutions." "My God," murmured Rachel, horrified. "The most alarming thing is that we still haven't found these people," continued the deputy director. "According to the records, approximately 30 individuals underwent complete conditioning, as they called it. But there's no indication of where they are now." "They could be anywhere," concluded Peter somberly, "seemingly normal people, but programmed to respond to specific stimuli." "Exactly like what happens with Bandit," added Rachel. "The difference is that he managed to partially resist the conditioning." Deputy Director Marina took a folder from her bag and handed it to Murphy. "This was found in one of the facilities. We thought you might help interpret it." The ex-sergeant opened the folder, revealing photographs and technical documents related to a more sophisticated device than the one used to control Bandit. The technical specifications indicated expanded range and capacity to reach multiple subjects simultaneously. "It's an advanced version of the control device," he explained, after carefully examining the material. With this, they could activate the conditioning in several individuals at the same time, within a considerable radius. "Why would anyone need something like that?" questioned Jack, who until then had been listening silently. "Crowd control." Murphy promptly responded. "Imagine a group of people strategically positioned at a demonstration or public event. With a single command, all would enter synchronized operational mode." The implication was too terrifying to be ignored. It wasn't just about isolated experiments, but potentially a tool for large-scale social manipulation. "This is no longer just a deviated military project," concluded Rachel. "It's a threat to national security and fundamental rights. That's why the investigation has been elevated to the highest level of priority," confirmed Marina. "The Attorney General himself is directly monitoring the case, but we face resistance from sectors that would prefer all this to remain buried." "The powerful people that Anderson mentioned," recalled Peter. "Exactly," nodded the Deputy Director. "We suspect there's involvement from high-ranking military officers, politicians, and even businessmen, with specific interests in social control technologies. But we still don't have concrete evidence linking them directly to the project." As the discussion progressed, Rachel noticed that Bandit, who was peacefully grazing in the field near the house, had suddenly raised his head, his ears alert, capturing something that the humans hadn't yet perceived. The buffalo's behavior had become a reliable early warning system in recent weeks. "Something's wrong," she murmured, interrupting the conversation. "Bandit's sensing something." Everyone fell silent, observing the animal through the window. His body was tense, his head fixed firmly toward the access road to the farm, still beyond the group's visual range. "How long until backup arrives?" Marina quickly asked one of her agents, her hand instinctively moving to the weapon in her holster. "At least 20 minutes, he replied, already on alert. The distant sound of approaching vehicles confirmed everyone's apprehension. They weren't expecting visitors, and the timing was disturbingly convenient after the new discoveries. "It could be them," warned Murphy, his expression grave. "If they discovered we're gathering all the evidence here, we need to protect." "The documents and digital files," Marina promptly decided. "They're our best chance to expose the entire operation." Peter was already in action, performing emergency backups and transferring files to secure servers. Jack and one of the agents ran to strategically position the vehicles, creating an improvised barrier. Rachel ran to Bandit, guiding him to the reinforced stable they had prepared precisely for situations like this. "Stay here," she instructed, briefly caressing the animal's muzzle. "I'll be back as soon as I can." The buffalo snorted softly, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. His eyes, now much more expressive than on the day she had met him at the auction, seemed to convey a clear message. Be careful. When she returned to the house, she found everyone in strategic defensive positions. Marina had assumed command of the situation with the natural authority of someone who spent a lifetime in risk operations. 3 vehicles approaching, informed one of the agents, who was observing through binoculars. Black SUVs, no visible identification. Tactical approach movement. They seemed professional. The tension was palpable as they watched the vehicles park in precise formation about 150 feet from the house. Men in black quickly descended, moving with the fluid coordination of a trained team. Unlike the agents who accompanied Anderson in Oak Ridge, these displayed no type of official identification. "Special Operations Team," murmured Murphy, recognizing the movement pattern. "Probably hired mercenaries, not official military." "That changes everything," replied Marina, her face hardening. "If they're not using military or police identification, they're not here legally." An older man with grey hair and impeccable posture advanced to the front of the group. Even at a distance, his presence commanded attention. General Montgomery identified Murphy, surprised. He was Anderson's direct superior, officially retired 2 years ago, but I always suspected he continued involved behind the scenes. "Is he the one behind all this?" asked Rachel. "No," replied Murphy, thoughtful. "Even Montgomery answers to someone. He's just the operational arm of something bigger." The general approached more, stopping at a safe distance. His voice, powerful despite his age, cut through the tense silence. "Deputy Director Foster, we know you're in there. Let's resolve this civilly." Marina exchanged quick glances with her agents before responding. "General Montgomery, this is an official FBI operation. any matters related to the case must be handled through the appropriate channels. The General let out a short, dry laugh. I'm afraid we don't have that luxury, Deputy Director. What you have there are classified documents and military property. I'm here with direct authorization from the National Security Council to recover them. How convenient, retorted Marina. And does this authorization justify an approach with unidentified men, armed and in vehicles without official registration? While the tense dialogue continued, Peter was finalizing the data transfer to secure servers and preparing a physical package with the most crucial evidence. Murphy discreetly signaled to Rachel. We need a plan B. The reinforcements won't arrive. In time, and they outnumber us. Rachel nodded, her mind working quickly. She looked at the stable where Bandit was protected, and an idea emerged, risky, but possibly their only chance. The inhibitor device you used in Oak Ridge, she whispered. To Murphy. Does it still work? Yes, but the effect is limited. Why? What if we do the opposite, she proposed. What if, instead of inhibiting, we amplify the signal? Murphy's eyes widened with the sudden understanding. Create a massive interference. Can any control device they might have. It's risky, but it might work. While Marina maintained the dialogue with General Montgomery, gaining precious time, Peter and Murphy worked feverishly on modifying the inhibitor device. Jack strategically positioned himself to ensure an escape route through the back of the property. Ready, Peter finally announced, showing the modified device. I amplified the signal using components from my equipment. I don't know how long it will last before burning out, but it should create significant interference. Rachel took the device and, taking advantage of a moment when attention was focused on the verbal confrontation between Marina and Montgomery, discreetly slipped out of the house toward the stable. Bandit was waiting, restless. The buffalo seemed to sense the tension in the air. Rachel approached, stroking his neck to calm him. We need you, big guy, she whispered. One more time. Outside, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. General Montgomery had lost patience with Marina's diplomatic evasions. Enough games. Deputy Director, you have exactly 2 minutes to hand over all the documents and specimen B-17, or we'll enter by force. That's when Rachel activated the modified device. The effect was immediate and unexpected. One of Montgomery's men, who was discreetly holding a device similar to the one used to control Bandit in Oak Ridge, dropped it as if he had received an electric shock. The device emitted sparks before completely shutting down. Interference, he shouted. We've lost control. Montgomery's face contracted in fury and surprise. Impossible, he vociferated, turning to his men. Enter now, recover everything. Chaos ensued. The FBI agents opened defensive fire while Montgomery's men advanced in tactical formation. Marina shouted containment orders, trying to avoid a fatal confrontation. In the midst of the confusion, no one immediately noticed the stable door opening. It was the sound, a powerful snort that seemed to shake the very air, that finally caught everyone's attention. Bandit emerged, imposing and determined, with Rachel at his side. The buffalo advanced without hesitation, not in an uncontrolled attack, but with directed precision, as if executing a maneuver for which he had been trained. Montgomery's men, surprised by the sight of the animal that should be under control, hesitated momentarily. It was all that Marina's team needed. Taking advantage of the distraction, the FBI agents advanced, gaining tactical position. Fall. Back, ordered Montgomery, realizing that the situation had drastically changed. Fall back now. Amid the confusion, Jack appeared with his truck from the back of the property. Peter had already loaded the essential equipment and the most important evidence. Let's go, he shouted to Rachel. Now! With a specific whistle that she had practiced for weeks, Rachel signaled to Bandit. The buffalo responded immediately, running in her direction. Together they boarded Jack's truck, which accelerated down a secondary trail, disappearing into the dense vegetation before Montgomery's men could react. Marina and her agents maintained the defensive position, ensuring the escape of the group and the evidence. The deputy director exchanged a significant look with Rachel before the truck disappeared around the bend, a look that promised continuity and justice. This isn't over, General, Marina firmly declared, As FBI reinforcements finally arrived at the location, sirens announcing their approach. In fact, it's just begun. General Montgomery watched the truck disappear, his face a mask of contained fury. At that moment, both he and Rachel knew an indisputable truth. The battle for the exposure of Project Sentinel had entered a new and dangerous phase. 6 months had passed since the confrontation at Rachel's property. Autumn was already coloring the mountains of Pine Ridge Valley with shades of red and gold when a familiar jeep climbed the dirt road leading to the new refuge, an isolated farm in the foothills of the Great Ridge Mountains, protected by imposing mountains on one side and deep valleys on the other. Rachel observed the vehicle's approach from the porch of the main house, a rustic but comfortable construction that now served as her temporary residence. At her side, Bandit peacefully grazed, his black coat now shiny and healthy, without any trace of the dejected animal she had met at the auction almost a year before. The jeep parked and Peter got out, carrying his inseparable backpack of electronic equipment. His face, previously tense and constantly alert, now displayed a genuine smile. "It's over," he announced, approaching. "It's finally over." Rachel felt a wave of emotion course through her. After months living in a limbo of uncertainty and constant danger, those words seemed almost unreal. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice betraying the hope she was trying to contain. Peter nodded, sitting next to her on the porch and opening his laptop. The Congressional Committee voted unanimously for the continuation of the investigations and indictment of all those involved, he explained, showing recently published news. Deputy Director Marina's testimony and the evidence we collected were decisive. General Montgomery was arrested this morning, along with 3 senators and a cabinet secretary. Rachel read the headlines, still not completely believing. The operation that had begun with the impulsive purchase of a mistreated buffalo had grown to become one of the largest military and political scandals in the country's recent history. Project Sentinel. Committee confirms illegal experiments on animals and humans. Former high-ranking military officers indicted for crimes against human rights. Mind control substance was tested on vulnerable populations. "And what about the victims?" she asked, the concern evident in her voice. 23 have already been located and are receiving specialized treatment, replied Peter. Dr. Lucy is leading an interdisciplinary team to develop a protocol for reversing the conditioning based on what we learned from Bandit. As if understanding he was being mentioned, the buffalo approached, his majestic head lowering gently to receive a caress from Rachel. The bond between the two had strengthened during the months of flight and clandestinity, surpassing the typical relationship between human and animal. "Did you know he was officially declared the first animal with special legal status of victim and witness in a criminal case?" commented Peter, smiling at the buffalo. "The press is calling the case the buffalo that brought down a scheme." Rachel smiled, stroking Bandit's neck. "He deserves every recognition. Without him, we would never have discovered the truth." The sound of another vehicle approaching interrupted the conversation. An official FBI car climbed the road, followed by a familiar pickup truck. From it descended Deputy Director Marina, Jack, and to Rachel's surprise, Murphy, supported by a cane, but looking much better than the last time she had seen him. "I brought some people who were eager to see you," announced Marina as the group approached. Warm hugs and greetings were exchanged on the sunny porch. Jack, always practical, was already unloading groceries and bottles of wine from the pickup. "I thought the occasion deserved a celebration," he explained, holding up a bottle of domestic sparkling wine. "After all, it's not every day that you bring down a government conspiracy before breakfast." The comment drew laughter from the group, relieving the accumulated tension of months of struggle and uncertainty. Murphy, in turn, brought a folder of documents that he solemnly handed to Rachel. "These are your grandfather's personal files that we managed to recover from military deposits," he explained. "I thought you might like to have them. Edward was a man ahead of his time. He predicted many of the consequences of Project Sentinel before they even became reality." Rachel emotionally leafed through the documents, recognizing her grandfather's firm and clear handwriting. Among technical reports and scientific notes, she also found pages of a personal diary where Edward expressed his ethical doubts and the internal conflict he faced upon realizing the dangerous direction the project was taking. "I cannot simply abandon and pretend I don't know," read one particularly touching entry. Each animal in those facilities, especially B-17, carries a consciousness, a will to live that transcends our limited understanding. If I abandon them, I am condemning not only them, but potentially countless other beings, humans included, to a fate that no creature deserves, the prison of their own mind. "He knew," murmured Rachel, moved, "and he stayed in the project not out of cowardice but to try to protect the victims and gather evidence." "Your grandfather was the definition of silent courage," confirmed Murphy. "He and I secretly worked to document everything, even knowing it could cost us our lives. When he realized they were becoming suspicious of him, he hid the most crucial evidence and left clues that only someone he trusted could follow." "And that person was me," concluded Rachel, finally understanding the extent of the legacy she had inadvertently inherited. "But how could he know I would find Bandit?" Marina, who was attentively listening to the conversation, intervened. "We found records suggesting that your grandfather secretly altered the final designation of B-17, ensuring that he would be sent, specifically to that auction in the region where you live. The chances of you being there that day were small, but he bet on your heart. He knew that if you saw a wronged animal." "I wouldn't resist helping him," completed Rachel, the pieces finally falling into place. The group gathered at the large table on the porch for a celebration lunch prepared by Jack, who revealed surprising talents in the kitchen. The conversation flowed naturally, alternating between memories of the tense moments they had lived and plans for the future. "What comes next for you?" asked Marina, addressing Rachel and Peter, who in the last few months had become more than investigation partners. Peter looked at Rachel before answering, a complicit smile on his lips. "We're developing a monitoring system to identify any attempt to reactivate research similar to Project Sentinel, a kind of early warning system. And I'm finishing my specialization in animal behavior with a focus on trauma recovery," added Rachel. "Dr. Lucy is mentoring me. We want to establish a protocol to identify and treat other animals that may have undergone similar experiments." Murphy raised his glass in a toast. "To Edward Davis and his extraordinary granddaughter, proving that the truth, no matter how much they try to bury it, always finds a way to come to light." Everyone joined the toast, even Bandit, who received a special apple from Rachel to mark the occasion. The buffalo had become a kind of symbol for the group, a living reminder that resistance to control is possible, even in the most adverse circumstances. When the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting golden rays over the farm, Marina called Rachel to a more reserved corner of the porch. "I have something to show you," she said, extending an official envelope. "It's Bandit's new documentation. He is no longer classified as military property or evidence. From today, he has a unique legal status, protected sentient being." Rachel examined the documents, not hiding her emotion. "This means?" "It means that he is officially under your guardianship, but not as property," explained Marina. "He is legally recognized as a being with his own rights, the first of a new legal category that we hope to expand to other animals in special situations." That night, after the guests departed with promises of frequent returns, Rachel sat on the grass next to Bandit, observing the first stars appearing in the clear mountain sky. The buffalo rested peacefully, his rhythmic breathing creating small clouds of vapor in the cooling air. "We did it, big guy," she whispered, stroking the powerful neck of the animal. "We're free now, both of us." In the half-light of dusk, Bandit's eyes seemed to contain all the wisdom of the world, not just the instinctive awareness of an animal, but something deeper, forged in the trials they had faced together. A mutual understanding that transcended words and species. Peter joined them, bringing a cup of hot tea for Rachel. He sat next to her in contemplative silence, admiring the mountain landscape and the sky that was now painted with thousands of stars. "You know what impresses me most about this whole story?" he commented after a few minutes. "How something as simple as a gesture of compassion at an auction ended up triggering a chain reaction that changed so many lives." Rachel smiled, remembering that distant day when, on impulse, she had raised her hand to bid on a buffalo that nobody wanted. "It wasn't a coincidence," she replied, thoughtful. "Somehow my grandfather knew our paths would cross. He trusted that I would make the right choice when the moment came." "And you did," confirmed Peter, intertwining his fingers with hers. In the distance, in the mountains, the echo of thunder announced a distant storm, not a threat, but a promise of renewal. Rachel felt a deep peace settle in her heart. The path had been turbulent, marked by dangers and shocking discoveries, but also by friendships forged in adversity and by a greater purpose that united them all. Bandit raised his head, looking directly at her as he had done at that first encounter, at the auction. But now there was no plea in his eyes, only a shared tranquil certainty. Together, they had confronted the limits of human control over other creatures and emerged from the other side with a fundamental truth, that freedom, once awakened, cannot be easily suppressed. Night was falling completely over the mountains of North Carolina, enveloping the farm in a mantle of serene darkness. But for Rachel, Bandit, and all who participated in that extraordinary journey, a new light had emerged, the light of truth finally liberated, shining like a beacon to guide the path ahead. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us what city you're watching from.